I'm so excited to be bringing the message to you this morning. And I just want to start by talking to you a little bit about my life. And some of you were here for my last message, and so I'll just touch on that a touch. But 2024 was the most difficult year of my life. It was a year that I felt lost. It was a year that I felt confused. It was a year that I felt vulnerable. And if I could pick one emotion that dominated that year so much, it was the emotion of unsure. I was so very unsure of what the rest of my life was going to look like. And for those sitting in the room, if you know me well, I don't like that feeling. I like to be sure. I like to be certain. I like to have the idea that I have a lot more control over things than what I actually do. And so 2024 was a really challenging year for me. And at the beginning of this year, 2025, I went out for a run because I love to run. And so I ran this run and I did 5 kilometers uphill to a lookout, and then I ran 5 kilometers downhill. And as I was running downhill, I felt like God say to me, Rachel, this is going to be a downhill year. And not downhill in the sense of like, crash and burn. It was actually like this is going to be an easy year, like a downhill year. Like last year was uphill. It was hard work, but this year it's going to be downhill. And I thought that's an unusual thing for God to say to me. Normally, I feel like God doesn't invite me into easy things. And so I felt a little bit unsure, like, am I just making this up in my head? Like, do I want an easy year? So I'm just pretending that this is what God is saying to me. But after a little while, I thought, you know what? No, I'm going to take that and I'm going to run with that. Like, if I think God said that to me, I'm going to take it and I'm going to run with it. And so I started to tell a few people, I think God told me that I'm going to have a downhill year. Like, I think this year is going to be an easy year. And I just really want to embrace that. And so I thought, I'll just start speaking that out. And so I did. Anyways, term 1 started and I was like, you know what? I think I heard God right. No one was really getting sick in our household. My kids were being, some pretty well behaved as they can be. Mark and I were in a pretty good place. Things were starting really well. And I thought, maybe I did hear God right. And then term 2 hit. And things stopped being so easy. I've been a pastor at this church for 14 years. And term 2 was the most difficult term that I've had being a pastor. I love my job. I think I could count on one hand the days that I come to work and I go, oh no, I just want to go home. And I reckon at least 3 or 4 of them all happened in those 3 months. It was a time where I thought, you know what, I don't know if I can keep on doing this. And then, my family started, being normal and misbehaving. And, I have 4 children, I have a husband, I now have a puppy. And so when your household is that full, I don't know if you guys ever get this feeling, but sometimes it feels like the hits just keep on coming. The hits just keep on coming. And I was like, you know what, God, this isn't feeling so easy anymore. And a few weeks ago, as a ministry team, we went away for a retreat. And really unintentionally, I went for another run, but I was running much shorter distances because I've been overcoming some injuries. And it was just a short run, so I thought I'm just going to run anywhere because, it's only 3 Ks. I won't plan out my run. But it was really interesting that what happened is that I ended up running 1.5 Ks uphill to a lookout, and then I had to run 1.5 Ks back downhill. And I felt like as I was running back downhill, I felt like God reminded me of what he said to me, that this was going to be a downhill year. And when I went back, I started journaling and I was feeling a little bit confused. Like, God, why are you reminding me of something that, you didn't really come through on? And so this is what I ended up writing in my journal. I said, I wonder if it's less about the terrain and more about the difference with working with God than working against God. The invitation to move with his Spirit. I'm going to read that one more time. I wonder if it's less about the terrain and more about the difference with working with God rather than against him. The invitation to move with his Spirit. And as I wrote that down, I thought, that, there's probably no version in this life where we're never going to have to run uphill. That our years are going to involve hills and mountains. But I think what God was inviting me into is he was saying to me, Rachel, you can be running uphill, but if you move with me, if you work with me, if you follow my lead, it will feel like you're running downhill, even though you might be climbing up the steepest mountain of your life. And church, as we begin our brand new series, Living Freely, I wonder if this is an invitation to all of us. That God is actually saying to us that you can run downhill with me. That you can run downhill with me, that you can go and face and climb the most steepest mountains in your life. But if you are doing it with me, it will feel like you are running downhill. If there's any runners in the room, I've heard myself say this, that I could run hill all day. Like when you have just a slight little decline, you just feel like you could just keep on running and keep on running and keep on running. And isn't that a promise that God gives us, that he will sustain us, that he will renew us, that he will give us the energy, that we can feel like we are running downhill, that there will be a freedom that we can experience that we have never experienced before. And so in this series, we are going to be looking at the book of Romans and in particular, chapter 8. And before we get into the text for today, I want to talk a little bit about the book of Romans. And so the book of Romans was written by a man named Paul. And Paul, if I can get the slide up as well, and Paul Paul did write a lot of the New Testament. But this particular book, the book of Romans, it is actually a letter. And it is a letter that is written to the church in Rome, the early church in Rome. And this church is made up of two large groups of people. And so one of the groups are the Jewish Christians. And the Jewish Christians are essentially the people who have an Israelite history. It means that they are related to Joshua, who we have been learning about in the last few weeks. They are related to Abraham and Isaac and to David and to Jesus. The Jewish Christians are the Israelite people that we learn about in the Old Testament. And they are the Israelite people who have chosen to follow Jesus and believe in Jesus. And so they are essentially half of this church in Rome. And the other half of this church are the Gentile Christians. And I feel like that word Gentile is like a little bit of like a slam, like it doesn't sound very nice. But essentially what Gentile, all that it means is that you are a non-Jewish or a non-Israelite Christian. So these people did not come from the Israelite people. They weren't related to Abraham and Isaac and Joshua and David and Jesus. But the great thing in the New Testament is that the promises of God are open up to all people in the world. And so the church in Rome has a bunch of Gentile Christians. And so what happens is these two groups of people are coming together. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this before, but when you have people that come together that have gone through different journeys, sometimes there's some conflict that takes place. Have you guys ever experienced that? Like think about a marriage, right? You've come from two original families and you've done life this way, and all of a sudden you're trying to make one brand new family, and there's a little bit of conflict because you do things differently. And so this is a little bit like what's happening with the church. They have journeyed two different ways and they're meeting with each other, and they all believe in Jesus, and they all believe that he came and died on the cross, and they all believe that Jesus is the way, but they are still having some issues. And so what Paul wants to do for this church is he wants to give them the fullest explanation of the gospel, right? He wants to give them the fullest explanation of the gospel. If you are familiar with the Bible, you might know there's one verse that sums up the gospel really simply. It is, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not die but have eternal life and live with him forever." John 3:16. That is a really simple explanation of the gospel. But Paul knew for these people that they needed a little bit more detail. And essentially what he is doing here is he is giving these people the foundational truths to hold on to. He's saying these are the things that as the church I want you to hold on to. And then he's saying all the extra stuff is extracurricular and you can let that go. And he's trying to unite these two groups of people. And so this is the book that we are looking at, and we are looking at the particular chapter of chapter 8. And today we're going to look at just the first 4 verses. And what I would love for you is, with the message today, is I would love for you to think about it as an introduction into the rest of the series. And so today we're going to be talking about how Jesus sets us free from condemnation. And if you don't know what that word is, don't worry, I will explain it later. But we are looking at the how Jesus set us free from condemnation. And the rest of the series will be a little bit like a what. Well, then what does that look like? If Jesus sets us free, what will that look like in our lives? And so today we are going to read just the first 4 verses of this book. And as I read through these four verses, I want you to be listening out for 3 things. All right? Because as I read through these 4 verses, I heard about the spiral of condemnation. Right? I can hear the spiral of condemnation and how Jesus wants to set us free from that. I can hear in these 4 verses the cycle of the law. The cycle of the law and how it has its limitations. And once again, how Jesus wants to set us free. And then I can also hear in these verses all about a sweet spot that Jesus is inviting us into. And so let's read these 4 verses together. They're going to be up on the screen behind me. It says, "So now there is no condemnation for those who belong to Christ Jesus." And so condemnation, if you're not sure what that means, essentially condemnation is the guilt and the punishment that we experience when we go against God. Right? The guilt and punishment that we experience when we go against God. A fancy Christian word of saying when we go against God would be sin. So when we sin, when we turn away from God, when we do the wrong thing, condemnation is what we experience, and that is the guilt and the punishment. So there is no guilt and punishment for those who belong to Christ Jesus. And because you belong to him, the power of the life-giving Spirit has freed you from the power of sin that leads to death. The law of Moses was unable to save us because of the weakness of our sinful nature. So God did what the law could not do. He sent his own Son in a body like the body we sinners have. And in that body, God declared an end to sin's control over us by giving his Son as a sacrifice for our sin. Next slide. He did this so that the just requirement of the law could be fully satisfied for us, who no longer follow our sinful nature, but instead follow the Spirit. I'm going to read that last line one more time. For those who no longer follow our sinful nature, but instead follow the Spirit. And so in this verse, I don't know if you heard about the spiral of condemnation. And so like I said before, condemnation is essentially the guilt and the punishment that we see. And if I can get the next slide, perfect. And I remember being a young girl, and I remember my mum explaining condemnation to me, and she explained it to me as a spiral. And she talked about how condemnation is a spiral. And so I made a quick little image for you guys. So essentially, we do the wrong thing. So because we are humans, we just quite naturally find ourselves doing the wrong thing. And then we feel guilty, and then we get further from God. And because it's a spiral, it keeps on going down. We do the wrong thing, we feel guilty, and we get further from God. And the spiral keeps on going, and we just get further and further from God. But you see, God is the kind of God that doesn't want us to have distance with him. He wasn't happy with us being stuck in the spiral of condemnation. And so he made a plan, and we hear about this plan in the Old Testament. And it gets referred to as the law. And the law is essentially the 10 Commandments. It's the instructions that were given to the Israelite people to keep them in accordance with God and his holy ways. And so if we can change the slide, we can see the cycle of the law. And so the way the cycle of the law works is that once again we do the wrong thing. Right? We do the wrong thing, and then we feel guilty. We feel guilty, and then this is where the law kicks in. Instead of it being a spiral and we get further and further from God, God says, well, rather than getting away from me, let's try to start coming back towards me. And so then the Israelite people, once they've done the wrong thing and they felt guilty, they needed to make up for it. And so the way that the Israelite people would make up for it is that they would get an animal and they would sacrifice the animal. And that animal would take on the punishment and the guilt for the wrong that was done. And another way that the Israelite people made up for it is that they kept the commandments as good as they could, with the intention of staying as close to God as possible. And so there was this sense that if I do the wrong thing, I'm actually getting further from God. And so I need to keep the commandments so that I can stay holy. And so there was a lot of work. There was a lot of making up for it. So that way the Israelite people could then come back into relationship with God, that they could live with God and his Spirit. But the reason why it's a cycle is because humans, right, we tend to do the wrong thing again. And so we end back up at the start of the cycle. We do the wrong thing. We feel guilty. We make up for it. Then we are back close to God. And maybe 3 minutes and 30 seconds later, we do the wrong thing again. We feel guilty. We make up for it. Maybe it got a little bit longer this time. We lasted a whole hour before we did a wrong thing. We feel guilty. We make up for it. And the cycle keeps on going. But what this passage tells us is that not only did Jesus come to set us free from the spiral of condemnation, but he actually also came to set us free from the cycle of the law. And so this is where we hear the invitation into this sweet spot. And if we could change the slide, I want to talk to you about this sweet spot. Actually, go back one slide. I did forget one thing. I forgot one thing. There was this quote that I came across as I was doing this research, and I thought it's so easily defined and sort of highlighted the limitation of the law. Because this is what the Israelite people lived under. And this is what the Jewish Christians are still struggling against. They're struggling against this concept of the law. But it says the law could not defeat sin, it could only detect sin. Right? The law could not defeat sin, it could only detect sin. Only Jesus can defeat sin through his work on the cross. Right? Only Jesus can defeat sin through his work on the cross. Sorry, now you can go to the next slide. It's a day of previews, isn't it? And this is the sweet spot that Jesus is inviting us into. You see, once again, I'm saying it a lot today, but we do the wrong thing. I do the wrong thing, you do the wrong thing. It's just how we are as humans. But you see, Jesus came. He came and he died on the cross to take all of our guilt away. Right? When he shed his blood on the cross, all of the guilt that we should be experiencing actually came on Jesus in that moment. And so that is how Jesus has set us free from guilt. Because he was a perfect man. He was the perfect sacrifice. And when he was sacrificed, all of that guilt, all of that shame, all of that pain, all of the stain was put on him. But the story didn't end there, because when Jesus died on the cross, 3 days later, he came back to life. And you see, it is in that moment when Jesus came back to life that he did all the work, that he made up for all of it. And the great thing is that it is no longer a cycle that we are stuck in, is because Jesus, it is a one and done deal. Jesus came and he died on the cross and he took away all of our punishment, all of our condemnation, all of our guilt. And when he came back to life, he did all the work that will ever need to be done so that we can enter into a relationship with him. Right? Jesus did all the work that will ever need to be done so that anyone can come back and enter into a relationship with him and to live in the freedom that his Spirit offers. And this is the invitation for us today. The invitation for us to let go of the guilt. The invitation to let go of the guilt, to let go of the punishment, to let go of all the work, and trusting that Jesus is the man who brings us into this sweet spot, this life of freedom that is offered to us. And so we are going to head into an application time now, and I'm just going to invite Israel up on the keys. He can just take his time though. I talk for a while. But the application time, it's going to be a little bit different to normal. And I'm going to break it up into two different sections. And last week, my parents came along to Austral, and I gave my dad the handout with the pen. And he's like, oh, last time you wanted me to write something down as well. And I said, well, Dad, you don't have to write anything down. But, if you want to, you can. And so in this first section of our application I'm actually going to encourage you to read along in the handout that I've given you. And so the handout that I've given you is the verses that we have just read, but they're in the Message paraphrase. And so that's what we're going to do for the first section. And in the second section, we are going to have a time of healing. And I'm going to ask people when we get there to close their eyes and to enter into a space. But before we do that, I just want to give a heads up that that sometimes we're not always prompted to go deeply every single day, all the time. And so I just really want to give permission that when I ask you to close your eyes, if you are feeling, like you're not really ready to go to a deep place today, that is so fine. You can keep your eyes open. You can go downstairs and make yourself a tea or a coffee. And I just really want you guys to think about where you are today. Where you are today. Because today is an invitation. And someone said to me just recently that, God is a gentleman. God is a gentleman, and he will never force you anywhere that you do not want to go. And so today, there is full permission to pick up your pen and write, or there is full permission to throw that pen away and say, I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing any work today. There's full permission to go to a deep space of healing today. But there's also permission to say, you know what? I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet.